In the winter of 1847, Blackthorn Lane was the road sensible people avoided after sunset. It ran for 3 miles through the countryside outside Whitby, twisting between fields, stone walls and patches of woodland so dense that even moonlight struggled to reach the ground. Travelers preferred the longer road through the neighboring village, especially during winter. They said a man sometimes walked Blackthorn Lane after dark. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew where he came from. But everyone agreed on one thing. You always heard him before you saw him, because the man was always whistling. My name was Samuel Whittaker, and at 29 years old I had little patience for ghost stories. I was the new schoolmaster at Blackthorn Village, having arrived from York only 6 months earlier. Whenever somebody warned me about the lane, I smiled politely and changed the subject. There was usually a sensible explanation behind such stories. A poacher mistaken for a phantom. Wind through branches mistaken for voices. Fear could transform almost anything into a monster. I believed that completely until the evening of 16th of December, when a dying farmer forced me to take Blackthorn Lane after midnight. Thomas Bell had collapsed at his brother's house while visiting the village. His wife lived 4 miles away and needed to be told before morning. The main road had flooded after days of heavy rain, leaving Blackthorn Lane as the only practical route. I borrowed a horse and lantern and left shortly before midnight. Frost covered the fields, and my breath hung pale before me. For the first mile, nothing happened. Then my horse slowed. Its ears flattened against its head. I encouraged it forward, but the animal refused. That was when I heard a quiet melody drifting between the trees. Someone was whistling. The tune was pleasant enough, almost cheerful, but there was something strange about its rhythm. The final note of every verse stopped abruptly, as though the person whistling had forgotten how the melody ended. I called into the darkness, asking whether someone needed assistance. The whistling stopped immediately. My horse began trembling beneath me. Then a man's voice came from somewhere behind the stone wall beside the road. "Would you finish it for me?" I raised my lantern. "Finish what?" There was no reply. After several seconds, the whistling began again, this time from much farther down the lane. I forced the horse onward. Around the next bend, I saw a man walking ahead of me. He was tall and unusually thin, dressed in a long black coat and a broad hat. He walked slowly with his hands clasped behind his back. The whistling continued. I called out, but he did not turn. My horse refused to approach him, so I dismounted and led it. Despite my faster pace, the distance between us never changed. The stranger remained perhaps 50 yards ahead. Then he reached a crossroads and stopped. He turned his head slightly, although not far enough for me to see his face. "Which way?" he asked. "Bell Farm," I replied. "I'm traveling to Bell Farm." The man nodded towards the left-hand road. "Then we are going the same way." I knew immediately that something was wrong. Bell Farm lay to the right. I had studied the route before leaving. "I believe it's the other road," I said. The stranger slowly turned towards me. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "No," he replied. "Not tonight." My horse suddenly reared. Tearing the reins from my hand, it galloped back towards Blackthorn. The stranger laughed softly. Then he began whistling again and walked down the left-hand road. I chose the right. For perhaps 20 minutes I saw nobody. Then the lantern flame began shrinking. The air smelled suddenly of stagnant water and wet soil. Ahead stood an old stone bridge crossing a narrow stream. A man was sitting on the parapet, black coat, broad hat. My stomach tightened. There was no possible way he could have reached the bridge before me. He stopped whistling as I approached. "Wrong road," he said. I asked what he wanted. The stranger lifted his head. Where his face should have been, I saw only darkness beneath the hat, only the end of my song. Then he whistled the melody again. I recognized it now. My mother had sung the same tune when I was a child. It was an old Yorkshire folk song called The Traveller's Rest. Without thinking, I quietly hummed the final notes that the stranger always omitted. The instant I finished, the night became completely silent. The man stood. "Thank you, Samuel." Hearing my name from him chilled me more deeply than the winter air. He stepped down from the bridge and pointed towards the water. "Now you know the ending." Something moved beneath the surface. Not one shape, but dozens. Faces appeared beneath the black water. Men and women stared upward through the current, their eyes open, their mouths moving soundlessly. Some wore clothes decades out of fashion. Others looked almost skeletal. I stumbled backwards. The stranger pointed towards them. They finished it too. Then every face beneath the water opened its mouth. The melody rose from the stream itself, whistled by dozens of dead lips. I ran. Behind me, the stranger laughed and called, "Don't worry, Samuel. I never take anyone the first time." His final words followed me into the darkness. I always let them hear the song twice. I reached Bell Farm shortly before 2 a.m. Mrs. Bell listened silently while I explained her husband's condition, then noticed my expression and asked what had happened. When I mentioned the whistling man, she crossed herself. Her grandfather had told her the story. In 1806, a traveling musician named Josiah Crane disappeared on Blackthorn Lane. Crane was known for composing a tune he claimed could make the dead answer. Weeks later, his body was discovered beneath the bridge, his throat cut so deeply that his head was almost severed. People began hearing his unfinished melody soon afterwards. Those who completed it supposedly disappeared after hearing it a second time. I left Blackthorn the following spring. I never heard the melody again and eventually convinced myself that exhaustion and fear had created the entire encounter. I became a headmaster in York, married, raised 3 children, and lived into my 70s. Before my death in 1891, I wrote down everything that happened on Blackthorn Lane. My family kept the account, but treated it as the strange recollection of an elderly man. Eventually it passed to my grandson, then his daughter, and finally disappeared into a box of family papers that nobody opened for decades. In 2021, those papers were donated to a local historical archive. A researcher named Daniel Price discovered my account and decided to investigate Blackthorn Lane. The old road still existed, although much of it had become a walking trail. Daniel visited on a December evening and recorded the journey on his phone. The video remained online for less than a week before he removed it. Copies still circulate. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happens. Then Daniel reaches the old stone bridge. He stops and tells the camera he can hear someone whistling. The microphone catches it clearly. A simple melody, The Traveller's Rest. Daniel laughs nervously and says somebody must be playing a joke. Then a tall figure appears behind him. perhaps 50 yards farther up the lane. Black hat. Daniel turns around, but the road behind him is empty. When he looks back at the phone screen, the figure has moved closer. He turns again. Nothing. On the screen, however, the man is now standing directly behind him. The video ends there. Daniel Price disappeared that night. His phone was found on the stone bridge the following morning. Police searched the surrounding countryside for weeks and found no trace of him. They did discover something strange beneath the bridge. Carved into one of the stones were dozens of names and dates, stretching from 1806 to the present day. Daniel's name was the newest, but it wasn't the final one. Last December, another name appeared beneath his. Nobody in the village recognizes it. Not yet. And since then, walkers on Blackthorn Lane have reported hearing someone whistling after sunset. The tune always stops before the final notes. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely road at night and hear a stranger whistling an unfinished song, keep walking. Do not hum along, do not finish the melody. Because the whistling man does not forget the people who teach him how their song ends.
Every church has a bell that marks the hour, calls people to worship, or announces a funeral, but in the village of Hollowmere, the church bell rings only when someone is about to disappear. Not die, disappear, no body, no clues, no explanation. The village sits hidden between rolling hills, surrounded by thick woodland and ancient stone walls. Fewer than 200 people live there. Most have never left. Those who have, never return. For generations, the villagers have obeyed one simple rule. If the church bell rings after midnight, do not leave your house. Lock every door. Close every curtain. And whatever you hear outside, do not answer it. Naturally, nobody outside the village believed the stories, until journalist Emily Carter arrived. She was writing a series about Britain's forgotten places, ghost stories, old legends, village superstitions. She expected Hollowmere to be another harmless tale. The villagers welcomed her politely. But when she mentioned the church bell, the conversation stopped. One elderly man leaned closer and quietly said, "If it rings tonight, pretend you didn't hear it." Emily smiled. She thanked him, then continued filming. The church stood on a small hill overlooking the village, built from dark stone. Its tower leaned slightly to one side. The bell rope had long since been removed. There was no way anyone could ring it. That evening, heavy fog rolled across the fields. By 11 o'clock, the streets were completely empty. Every curtain had been drawn, every door locked. Emily sat alone in the village inn, her cameras ready. Midnight arrived. Nothing happened. She checked her watch. Perhaps the stories were exaggerated after all. Then dong. The bell rang once. The sound echoed across the valley, slow, deep, far louder than any church bell should have been. Dong. Again. The entire building seemed to vibrate. Emily rushed outside. The streets remained deserted. No lights, no movement. Only the church standing silently above the village. Then she heard footsteps. Not behind her. Ahead. Someone walked slowly through the fog. A tall figure carrying an old lantern. The light barely reached the ground. "Hello," Emily called. The figure stopped. Very slowly, it turned. Its face remained hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. It raised one arm, not waving, pointing towards the church. The lantern suddenly went out. The figure disappeared. Emily hurried uphill. The church doors stood open. Inside, hundreds of candles burned. Yet there was no one there. The pews were empty, the altar abandoned. Dust covered every surface, except the stone floor down the center aisle. Fresh wet footprints led towards the bell tower. Emily followed them. A narrow spiral staircase climbed into darkness. The higher she climbed, the colder the air became. Halfway up, she noticed something carved into the wall. Names, dozens of them, every one followed by a date. None had a death recorded, only the day they vanished. At the very top, she reached the bell chamber. The enormous bronze bell hung perfectly still. No rope, no mechanism, nothing moving. Yet, Dong! The bell rang again right above her head. Without moving, the sound shook the tower. Emily covered her ears. Then she heard another noise. Someone climbing the staircase. Slow, heavy, one step at a time. She called out. No answer. The footsteps continued. Closer, closer, until a hand appeared over the final step. It was grey, thin, almost skeletal. Another hand followed. Then a face. Emily's face, every detail, every expression. Except, its eyes were completely white. The thing smiled. You heard the bell. It spoke in Emily's own voice. So now, you answer it. The tower door slammed shut. The candles below went out. The church fell into darkness. Emily screamed. The villagers heard her. None of them opened their doors. By sunrise, the church stood silent once again. Police searched every inch of the building. Emily had vanished. Her cameras remained inside the bell tower. The final recording survived. It showed Emily backing away from the thing that wore her face. Then, the camera fell to the floor. For just a second, it captured the bell, swinging violently. Though nothing touched it, years later, visitors still come to Hollowmere. Most leave before sunset. Some stay the night. Very few ever hear the bell. But every now and then, just after midnight, the villagers quietly lock their doors. Because somewhere outside, the bell begins to ring, and if you listen carefully, between each toll, you can hear someone knocking. Not on the church door, on yours.
Shudder, North Yorkshire, England, 1928. There was one grave in St. Mary's churchyard that nobody would tend. It stood beneath an ancient yew tree, at the furthest edge of the cemetery. No flowers grew upon it. No inscription marked the stone, and whenever autumn came, the leaves somehow avoided it. Arthur Pembroke first noticed the grave 3 days after arriving in the village of Wetherby Cross. Arthur was a historian, not an important historian, as he would later admit. He wrote small books about small places, which were purchased by small numbers of people. Churches interested him, particularly medieval churches, and St. Mary's, with its Norman doorway and ruined Saxon foundations, was exactly the sort of place Arthur loved. The vicar, Reverend Cole, gave him permission to examine the parish records. For 4 days, Arthur worked happily. Baptisms, marriages, deaths. Then, he found something peculiar. A page had been removed from the burial register. Not damaged, removed, carefully cut away. The missing entries covered September 1746. Arthur mentioned it to Reverend Cole. The vicar became uncomfortable. Old books lose pages. This one didn't. Arthur pointed towards the binding. Someone cut it out. Cole closed the register. Then I suppose someone had their reasons. That should have ended the matter. But Arthur Pembroke possessed the unfortunate quality, common to historians, of becoming extremely interested the moment somebody told him something wasn't interesting. That afternoon, he explored the churchyard and found the unnamed grave. The headstone was unusual, no words, no dates, only a symbol, a circle with a vertical line through it. Arthur copied it into his notebook. Behind him, someone said, "I wouldn't do that." Arthur turned. An elderly man stood beside the path. Arthur recognized him as Jacob Mills, the village gravedigger. Why not? Jacob looked at the stone. Best leave that one alone. Whose grave is it? Jacob shook his head. Nobody's. Arthur smiled. Somebody must be buried there. Jacob looked directly at him. That's not what I said. Then he walked away. That evening, Arthur searched the village records again. Nothing. No grave, no burial, no mention of the symbol, until inside an old collection of parish correspondence, he discovered a letter, dated October the 2nd, 1746. The handwriting was difficult but readable. Arthur copied several lines. "As we have done as instructed. Chest the earth has been replaced. No marker bearing his name shall remain." As then, one final sentence. "As should the stone be disturbed, it must be returned before sunset." Prince Arthur stared at the words, then laughed. Village superstition. Precisely the sort of thing readers enjoyed. The following morning, Arthur returned to the grave. He examined the stone carefully. It wasn't fixed into the ground. Strange. Most stones of that age were buried deeply. Arthur pushed. Nothing. He pushed harder. The stone moved. Behind it, Something fell into the grass. A small iron object. Arthur picked it up, black with age. He slipped it into his pocket. Then remembered the letter. The stone must be returned before sunset. Sir Arthur smiled. Nevertheless, he pushed the headstone back into place.